Superintendent Critchfield, thank you so much for joining us. In October, the State Department of Education gave the okay for school districts to use content from PragerU if approved by their school boards, but since then your department has received letters and statements of concern from Idaho's federally recognized tribes. Are you concerned after hearing these responses from Idaho's tribes?
We always want to listen to the concerns of people, or particularly we're talking about our tribes in this case, and the objections that they have to how their history is portrayed. And PragerU doesn't get specifically into the history of Idaho tribes per se, but generally speaking about our native populations. And so, yes, we've received letters. I've had one-on-one conversations. I attended the Indian Education Summit meeting in December to hear directly from our educational tribal representatives. And one of the commitments that I've made to the tribes is to put and make available culturally relevant materials specifically about the history of our tribes here. Make that available in the same ways so that when our local districts are making decisions on what to supplement, because PragerU was not intended to replace the curriculum. It's supplementary, optional materials that could come as a part of a lesson. And so we've said, and I've said directly to them, if there are materials that you would like to have available to our boards in the same way that portray and discuss the history of our people here, or in general, the tribes across the country, we will make that available as well so that our districts have a wide variety of options to choose from.
One of the concerns that came up in the Council on Indian Affairs on Thursday was that even if none of the school districts that serve reservations, whether it's the Shoshone-Bannock or Nez Perce, even if none of those school districts use it, that if any school district in the state uses that content, then it could be pretty harmful for these tribes. After hearing that feedback, is rescinding that approval of PragerU on the table at all?
Rescinding, no, and again, it's optional. So these materials could already be in classrooms. Districts have the local authority to determine what goes in there, whether it's the formal curriculum or whether it's optional material. And so rescinding from my end doesn't take away the fact that it's still available material for anyone to be able to use. Our part in this was to connect standards to some of those materials, and not every portion of what's presented by them districts will want to use or may be appropriate for every lesson in every classroom. So it's no different than any other materials that are available. And visiting again with our tribal leaders, making the commitment to also bring and include the culturally relevant materials that they would like to have in our classrooms, I think is a great balance and a great way to move forward.
Do you know of any school districts that are using this material right now?
As of now, no. I know there's been discussions around the state, here and there, pockets, whether it's parents, community members, or board members. But to my knowledge, as of now, no one has formally adopted it as being approved for optional material.
You've said previously that Idaho is already a great state for school choice, and that has really driven a lot of the education conversation this year. And we have open enrollment at public schools, we have charter schools, we have liberal allowances for homeschooling. This year's the first year that the governor said that he's willing to entertain public money going for private education, with some parameters, of course. Are you on the same page?
Yes, with the same conditions. I've used some different terms than the governor, although the accountability term seems to be a consistent thread throughout, but also sharing the sentiments of the governor. And I think the question for me and what will be different this year, we'll see, rather than talking just generally about concepts and philosophies around choice, we've got some bills that are on the table that we'll be able to take a look at and then put that template over the top to say, is there transparency? Is there fairness? How do we level that playing field? And so to take the conversation from being too hyper-focused on choice, we have choice. The question really in the State House and on everyone's mind is who's going to write the check.
So what's the answer to that? What would pass Superintendent Critchfield's test on
right.
that?
Yes. So I think that there does need to be a level of assurance that the money that is going from the state goes for learning. And to me, that means it's going to someone, the adult in the room is someone that's had a background check. I don't think we have to have a one-to-one in every single place. In fact, we can't as far as the state and federal governments are concerned. We don't want to create two completely parallel systems. But with that said, I think the expectations of, again, having someone that's been vetted to be around children, assessing that learning has taken place, top my list. Also the reporting. Districts and charters have to report everything financially. That's that transparency piece that I don't think is unreasonable when our taxpayer dollars are going somewhere. We expect and require that across the board. If our taxpayer dollars go wherever that is, fill in the sentence, there is an expectation that we know where that went.
When you have that check, and you're looking at the bills that are currently on the table, do those line up?
Well, we just saw the introduction a couple days ago. And so I'm putting both of those bills in front of me and going line by line, making those comparisons, and then again putting that template on top of those to say which boxes are checked in which ways. Now, I think one of the discussions is going to be, how do we define accountability? Because there's a lot of ways to define that. And in my mind, if we're coming up with another government subsidy, which is what this is, subsidizing, then there needs to be some measures in place that we would expect for anyone in reasonable government.
Have any of the lawmakers who have introduced these bills contacted your office or you personally to ask your input?
Yes, Senator Lent this summer, as he was working on some things, called and we sat down a couple times and asked a similar question. You know, what are some things that you're looking at? And I know that he was asking that same question of others across the board. You know, I've had different legislators say, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? But as far as the bills that have been introduced so far, he was the only legislator to specifically sit down with me and ask, what are some of those components that are important to you?
Do you think that your feedback to Senator Lent ended up in his pieces of legislation?
The early perusal of his draft, I didn't see the final draft until the bill was printed. Yeah, there are some things in there. There's some things that we didn't talk about that are in there. And so we're going through there, myself and my team. I'm very concerned about the special education requirements that public schools have. And that's an important part for me. I don't think that we can, again, create these systems where on one hand, there are zero strings, no rules, here's your money, walk away. And then on the other system, all of the federal and state rules apply. And I think when we look at special education, that's one of those areas that I'm really taking a look at. I don't think you should be able to have one foot on both of those sides if the state is going to subsidize your choice.
A lot of the lawmakers who support public money going to private education have said that there's no greater accountability than the parents themselves or the legal guardians themselves, that if there is a school that is not properly serving their child, they're going to pull them out. You know, they've already expressed willingness to take their kids out of public school and put them in private school. So what's stopping them from saying, this isn't working out, you're not meeting my needs and my child's needs, regardless of whether the kid has special education needs or not? Is that enough of a check for you?
No. And here's why. Again, looking at what we've created here, I respect and will always defend a parent's right to choose. I don't think that that's the question, and I don't think that that's what the controversy is about. When our taxpayer dollars get involved in whatever the choices are, wherever government is involved, there is a level of expectation. So right now, a parent, by the way, public schools are not afraid of the competition. If a parent is not satisfied or the child isn't thriving in an environment, they absolutely should find that fit. And you can already do that, which comes back to who's going to pay for that. And so if the government is going to get involved, then we're going to say there's some things that we would expect of that. And as I talk to people, as I travel the state, my own neighbors, no one thinks that that's unreasonable. And you know, you look at some of these accountability pieces. I mean, ultimately, what I'm seeing on how some of these measures are accomplished, that it actually is an indirect accountability away from the parent, because you know, if it's a tax credit, you're putting the accountability to the tax commission to decide whether or not that money has been used incorrectly or not. And so I'm trying to understand how these things work together and then get us to that goal that we say we have of being accountable and transparent. I don't want to lose that word either.
You've also brought up a couple times the importance of background checks for anyone who is working with kids. I know that daycares do it, you know, that this is something that does happen in the private sector. Is it possible, though, to require a private educational institution to have background checks as a condition for indirectly or directly being a beneficiary of public money?
Well, if that's how the bill is drafted and that's what goes through the legislature and the governor signs it, absolutely. And I would add that it's not just teachers that are required in the public district and charter system to have background checks. Your lunch professionals, your custodians, your bus drivers, your paraeducators, anyone that's around a child. And I think that's one of the big expectations that everyone has, that when they send their child to school, they're in a safe facility around adults that are, you know, have the best interest of their child at play. And so I also don't think that's unreasonable. One of the things is I kind of step back from this conversation to say, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And one of the things that I hear consistently is that the public school system, which includes charters in Idaho, we're letting families down, therefore parents are taking their children out of the schools. The numbers don't support this mass exodus out of the public school system. Now, I agree that it's not a fit for everyone, but with that said, some of the frustrations that we hear from legislators and parents and community leaders is about the system. Well, who created the system? So many times our state, while pointing a finger back at the federal government saying, hey, you don't understand our needs, we're elected too, this is one size fits all. Our state acts like the federal government to the local district and charter and then says, well, people don't like the system. Well, you dropped all those laws, reports, all the requirements, and now we're going to create another system because this one is too burdensome or isn't getting the job done. So I think in part of this conversation, we've got to take a step back and say, what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? We want our parents to make their choices. What role should and does the government have in that?
Well, let's expand on that a little bit, because I've been here long enough that I remember teachers testifying about the burdens of filling out spreadsheets weekly and daily and trying to reach these metrics and trying to measure student growth and how burdensome that was. And that was a real thing. It meant that we had more metrics as far as student growth, though. How do you balance what you're hearing from teachers and also lawmakers and taxpayers, you know, pretty reasonable demands to say, how do we know that our investment is equaling student growth and student outcomes?
And I think that's the critical question that we look at. So I've asked my team to come up with the list of all of the state and federal requirements. And we'd like to have a open discussion on that thing exactly. Are the reports that we turn in once a year, are they tied to outcomes? Are they tied to performance? Or is it a compliance thing that we're just able to look at and say, okay, well, here's how our students are performing. But does it actually drive performance and drive achievement at the local level? And if it doesn't, then let's adapt. Let's determine those things that best do that. And within this whole biosphere that we're in, we can't lose sight of the fact that the local board members were elected by the same people who elected the legislature. So this disconnect that I hear and see at times where the state is saying this is how you will do it, whether you're in Clifton, Chalice, or Genesee, doesn't always fit. And in some ways, I'm now arguing on the side of, well, this is why we need to pay parents to be able to make a choice, because it isn't a one size fits all. Okay, well then let's take one step back and say, what do we need to adjust in the system so that parents, the public school system is a school of choice as well.
Do you have that answer? What do we need to adjust?
Well, we've got a list. There's a list that's coming now. The federal stuff, we'll see what President Trump does with the U.S. Department of Education. I mean, we hope that that money comes in block grants and that the restrictions of how those dollars can be used are lessened, if not taken away. Idaho's in a great position to educate our own kids. That's not the job of the federal government. In fact, I don't know that it's the job of the state at that point. It's the local district that sets those priorities and aligns the budget. And so we want to take a look at what the state requirements have been over time. We've just been piling them on to, I think, this critical point where we're saying, hey, some parents are leaving because this system doesn't work anymore. Well, let's fix it for all the kids. And to the way to get back to your question, I kind of went the long way around it, was to say we will have a list of things that we will say, these are things that don't answer that question, did our investment work? And let's come up with what those things are that make sense today in the modern context.
Because you brought up President Trump and his commitment multiple times to dismantle the Department of Education on the federal level, are you concerned about how that is going to affect students with disabilities? You know, those are federal mandates that public schools need to accommodate students, whether they have physical disabilities or learning disabilities, that they provide free and appropriate education for these kids that we know before this federal law went into place, that didn't happen before.
I think that we're good at doing that already. And minus the federal government, really the part where the federal government comes in too heavily is on all of the reporting. You want to talk about reports. Our teachers are naturally poised and trained to help our learners. Wherever they are, we know that learners all over the state have different needs and different requirements, and we've gotten good to where that's just the natural part of it. The burdensome part of this is all of the reporting, all of the ways that the money has to be spent in ways that maybe don't match the needs. So no, I am not concerned if the Department of Education goes away or has an adaptation, because we are taking care of kids now, and I think that we can handle that at the state level. Now, with that said, the worst thing in my mind is for the federal government to take the money away, which I understand the federal government doesn't have money, it's our money, to say we're not going to send your money back to you, but we're going to keep all of the rules in place. That would be a worse place than we are now. Ideally, it is a very surgical unwinding of that department to make sure that we're going in and finding those pressure points and saying, look, we can alleviate some burdens here we can help students in better ways.
Now, is there anything else that is on your priority list that you would like the legislatures to change to help improve education in Idaho?
Well, kind of drafting on this messaging that the money needs to follow the kids, there's nothing in the public schools budget that currently allows for that. And I've been looking at this for a very long time. I was on a local school board for 10 years. I've been at the state level for more than 10 years now. So over the last 2 years, as I've traveled the state and I talked to board members and everyone that you can think of, community members, parents, et cetera, what I've concluded in this conversation of we need more money. Yes, money is important, but what I'm really hearing is the money that is coming out is so tied up with strings that it can't go to the places that they need now. And we don't have a portion of the budget that reflects the types of students that are in our communities. Not the average, but the students that are in your hometown, that are your child. And so my policy proposal that we'll be bringing forward is to take a portion, not the whole budget, but to take a portion of the budget and align it to the type of students that are in the community. So we can weight those, we have weights. We know that some students cost more money. So a little more money for special education, more money for gifted and talented. Let's help our high performing students. More money for communities that have a high population of English language learners, or alternative schools, our small rural districts, and economically disadvantaged. These are all things that districts are already turning into us. We can verify them. The whole concept is to use the same money in a better way.
When are we going to see this proposal?
We're hoping in the next couple of weeks, where we're talking with our education chairman to see when we can get that. Right now we're going through the rules process, and as we've discussed, the school choice or paying for choice debate, that's kind of taking all the oxygen in the Capitol right now in education, and so we hope to have that out soon.
All right, Superintendent Debbie Critchfield, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.